The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. Blueprint for World Revolution in Motion. Part 1. From the beginning, I realized it too voluminous a work to cite all of the evidence contained in H.G. Wells's book, The Open Conspiracy, which supported the assertion that today we are living in the latter stages of it. However, what follows is a sufficient citation of evidence to support that conclusion. In fact, the evidence before us now and the events of our time, when rightly understood, leads to the pronouncement of the same verdict. Once this movement comes to its fullness, the whole planet is a prison, though its bars be invisible. Never before in the history of the world has mankind possessed such great troves of knowledge. Although this vast and ever-increasing encyclopedia of knowledge has brought with it immense benefits, it has also brought along with it many and great perils. The advent of this astounding collection and consolidation of knowledge and the possible repercussions were perceived more than a century ago by such visionaries as H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and others, who expressed their concerns through science fiction novels. It was Wells's belief that all of civilization would either unite and become one and continue to evolve to higher levels of being, or would sometime in the future face a global apocalypse. Even before the First World War, Wells had already grasped the concept of a nuclear atomic bomb, writing in detail about it in his book, The World Set Free. In his book, published in 1914, Wells depicts a scenario in which world capitals, major cities, and governments are devastated by nuclear war. The result is total global chaos and anarchy, causing a majority of those who survive to come together to form a global socialist world state. In this newly formed world order, individual freedom is surrendered and the nation-state is no longer a sovereign entity. All nations become bound by international law, de facto states subordinate to a central global government. From this point on, all of the world's forces, powers, and resources are consolidated and managed by a government of nations, theoretically for the benefit and advancement of cosmopolitan society, howbeit under the authoritarian rule of intellectual elitists, philosopher kings, who supposedly know better than everyone else and act out of devotion to the common good of others. To Wells, this scenario was not fiction, but a hopeful vision. Realizing the speed at which civilization was modernizing, and perceiving world governments as incapable of keeping up with or controlling technological advancements, it was his belief that the only hope for mankind was the creation of a new world order. And in 1939, he wrote a book under that very title. That book followed another book written a decade earlier, wherein Wells laid out not only a concept of a world order, but a plan to clear the ground and facilitate its creation. The earlier book was entitled The Open Conspiracy, Blueprints for a World Revolution. As implied by the title, the book contained a strategy for the convergence of all sympathetic parties into a movement of cultural revolt. The objective of this cultural revolution would be to openly overthrow traditional moral values and laws, systems, principalities, and establishments, with the goal of supplanting them. The book is in effect a blueprint for destroying government by representation and putting in its place an authoritarian system administered by those who are deemed the wisest. It is at its core the Great Reset. Getting down to the crux, in essence, it is an attempt to overthrow God and place man sitting in the seat of God, showing himself that he is God. The Open Conspiracy today. One must keep in mind when reading The Open Conspiracy that also this movement materialized, it did not do so in the name of the Open Conspiracy, and most adherents of the movement, as Wells said they would be, are completely unfamiliar with the term, for it is not a formal conspiracy of personal connections or associations. For the greater part of conspirators are united by a mindset shared in common and a totalitarian spirit that engages them into action, rather than knowing one another and contriving plans. Indeed, Wells himself realized that this would be the case and stated that he was not creating anything, but rather participating in something that was existing, an ideological movement which he hoped to help organize and promote into being. Almost 100 years ago, Wells wrote, "Hundreds of thousands of people everywhere are now thinking upon the lines foreshadowed by my open conspiracy, not because they had ever heard of the book or phrase, but because that is the way thought was going." Decades ago, Wells forecasted a movement consisting of many diverse entities which would unite in an organized effort to erase history and overthrow traditional values, cultures, and laws, and to replace them with modern progressive worldviews. It is a spiritual mass movement consisting of some who are aware of it, but many more who are not. Nonetheless, all are enjoined in the same totalitarian spirit. That spirit is the spirit of Antichrist. But what exactly is the open conspiracy as defined by Wells? Firstly, as implied by its name, it is not a secret plot, but rather an in-your-face rebellion carried out openly. It tells you exactly what the goal of the conspiracy is. Secondly, unlike most mass movements of the past, it does not exist under one name or banner. It is a conglomeration of subgroups, orientations, and entities which support each other in the destruction of the current order, believing their personal agenda will succeed in a collective victory of all agendas combined which have joined to support the cause. However, whether willingly or unwillingly, those involved in the movement ignore the fact that the movement only exists by the cohesion of hatred of an enemy in common. Should individual freedoms ever fail, the authoritarian collective established in its place will tear itself to pieces. For the various factions can only remain unified as long as their enemy in common exists. After that enemy is removed, the stronger elements will purge out the weaker. History teaches us this about fanatical mass movements. What follows is a few excerpts from Wells's 1928 book, The Open Conspiracy, in the words of H.G. Wells. In this book, we are not starting something. We are describing and participating in something which has started. It arises naturally and necessarily from the present increase of knowledge. The open conspiracy is not to be thought of as a single organization. It is a conception of life out of which efforts, organizations, and new orientations will arise. The open conspiracy must be heterogeneous in origin. Its initial groupings and associations will be of no uniform pattern. The League of Nations movement, the birth control movement, and most radical and socialist societies are fields into which open conspirators may go to find adherents more than half prepared for their wider outlook. The open conspiracy is a fuller and ampler movement into which these incomplete activities must necessarily merge. The open conspiracy itself can never be imprisoned and fixed in the form of an organization. There should be many types of groups. Collective action had better for a time, perhaps for a long time, be undertaken not through the merging of groups, but through the formation of ad hoc associations for definitely specialized ends, all making for the New World civilization. We must insist that the idea of the open conspiracy ever becoming a single organization must be dismissed from the mind. It is a movement, yes, a system of purposes, but its end is a free and living, if unified world. Allow me to interject here. Wells is warning not to unify under one name, because in so doing it creates one target easily identifiable. By remaining an eclectic jumble of assorted organizations, orientations, agendas, and causes, the diversity and divisions within the movement, at least in the beginning, are indeed its strength. Wells. It is that there already exist in the world a considerable number of movements in industry, in political life and social matters and education, which point in the same direction as the open conspiracy and are inspired by the same spirit. This is 1928. The open conspiracy, the world movement for the supersession or enlargement or fusion of existing political, economic, and social institutions, must necessarily, as it grows, draw closer and closer to questions of practical control. It is likely in its growth to incorporate many active public servants and many industrial and financial leaders and directors. It may assimilate great masses of intelligent workers. While the open conspiracy is no more than a discussion, again this is 1928, it may spread unopposed because it is disregarded. There is much more, but I will end here for now and possibly add more in another post. But I think it's clear. There are people going back over 100 years ago that knew and understood much better the things taking place today than many of the people today who are actually involved in doing the things taking place. The reason for the consistency of the movement over time is that the movement is spiritual in nature. So being, it is able to pass from one generation to another, morphing as necessary to adapt to the times. Most of the participants involved in this spiritual conspiracy are unaware of any conspiracy at all, because the conspirator they hold in common is a spirit they deny exists, the greatest conspirator of all who even imagined to overthrow God. Currently, there are many exceedingly evil things happening in our world that go far beyond reason. They can only be understood in a spiritual context of knowledge of invisible forces. To not believe in God is something I cannot do that I realize some others can. However, seeing everything happening in the world today, it blows my mind that anyone cannot believe in the devil.